Mayim Bialik is a mega successful sitcom star, but she's also fueled by deep-seated childhood trauma. From accidents to mental health, she's had her fair share of dark struggles. Mental health advocacy is an important topic, and Mayim Bialik has been open about her own struggles. She started seeing a therapist in her late teens, although she knew in hindsight that she'd been struggling long before that. But at the time, mental health awareness just wasn't as widespread as it is now. That was plenty clear when she got her first period, as her mood began fluctuating to the point that it gave her panic attacks. Unfortunately, Bialik wasn't really given the help she needed at the time. Furthermore, she didn't exactly know what kind of help she even needed in the first place. As she explained in a video for the Child Mind Institute in 2018, "I had this notion when I was younger that if something didn't work once, or if a therapist didn't work, or if a medication didn't work, then nothing would ever work. I wish I could have told my younger self that something will work. It's just going to take sometimes more research, sometimes more referrals, and really figuring things out like your life depends on it."
Because for me, it did.
Bialik has also discussed mental health advocacy on her own podcast, Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. On one episode, she spoke about obsessive-compulsive disorder and dispelled a number of myths. She made it clear that OCD is a serious and potentially severe condition that's effectively a cycle of anxiety and seeking out ways to reduce that anxiety.
The obsession is the internalizing aspect, and the compulsion is the externalizing aspect.
In terms of her own experiences with OCD, Bialik opened up about that in a video for the Child Mind Institute.
One of the things that made my life really difficult was trying new things, and it's still really hard for me.
For Bialik, something as simple as cutting her hair short was a really big deal for her and a pretty hard decision to make. Fortunately, she had people in her life there to support her, which helped her remember an important lesson.
Change can be good, and even when it's scary, it's still okay.
In 2012, Mayim Bialik received her first ever Emmy nomination for The Big Bang Theory. But that same year, she was also involved in a serious car crash that left one of her hands badly injured. She was ultimately able to treat the accident with relative levity by making jokes with her publicist and expressing gratitude for the love she received from friends and fans. As she told Vanity Fair, "It's been so nice to see people's concern." During an appearance on the Really Famous with Kara Meyer Robinson podcast in 2021, Bialik opened up about the long-term effects of the accident, as she revealed, "A tremendous amount of literally trauma stuff surfaced. I became sound sensitive. I became touch sensitive."
I was like, what is happening?
As certain physical sensations like sounds and lights suddenly became amplified, Bialik couldn't understand why. Fortunately, she's been able to find support with her son, who has similar sensitivities as his mom. So they help each other out in ways like covering each other's ears when a fire truck passes by. As Bialik revealed on the Really Famous podcast, she's a highly sensitive person, both physically and emotionally. It feels like a superpower to her sometimes, as she's very empathetic and scarily good at understanding emotions. But on the flip side, that sensitivity has also contributed to some hardship. As she admitted to the Daily Beast in 2022, "I think many of us were parented the way that I was, with a lot of love and a handful of confusion." Essentially, Bialik's emotional sensitivity didn't always mesh well with growing up in an immigrant household. As she put it on the Really Famous podcast, "You get a lot of sticking together and let's keep it all in the tribe and no one needs to know what's going on."
I happened to be the kind of kid that was deeply affected by that kind of confusion and tension.
At various times throughout her life, people have told Bialik that she was too emotional and needed to calm down, which only made things worse. But she's now more understanding of her own emotions and realizes how they can be both a blessing and a curse. Mayim Bialik comes from a Jewish immigrant family, and that upbringing has strongly affected her identity. During a 2021 appearance on the podcast Pretty Messed Up, she discussed the effects that intergenerational trauma has had on her family, as her grandparents immigrated from Poland after escaping pogrom massacres. There were plenty of positives about Bialik's upbringing, and she was raised with a lot of love and surrounded by creativity. But the trauma of her family history couldn't just disappear. As she put it, "My parents struggled a lot, and it weighs on you, especially as a child." Bialik took on a lot of that stress by herself and felt that she couldn't talk to anyone or ask for help, because that's just not what her family did. What's more, all of that stress just felt normal to her, which actually made things harder for her when she eventually moved out for college. Rather than feeling a weight lift from her shoulders, she felt like a core part of her identity had just disappeared. She even started wondering whether she was actually good enough for anything else. In an episode of her podcast that Mayim Bialik considers one of her personal favorites, she opened up about her experience with eating disorders. She spoke to activist Glennon Doyle and admitted that she had never really talked about this part of her life before.
People are like, well, why are you so overweight? Well, because I'm a compulsive overeater, and in addition to being, an anorexic and restrictor.
Bialik spoke about the entertainment industry's unrealistic beauty standard and the stress she had endured by trying to meet those standards. That stress was likely amplified by people in her past telling her that she was too heavy for a specific role. Looking back on all that, she now tries to not care too much about what Hollywood thinks, and instead stand by what she herself thinks about how she looks. Bialik later revealed to People magazine that the whole conversation was completely unplanned, while also crediting Doyle with giving her a safe space to be so vulnerable. As she put it, "If she can be brave and be so helpful to people, maybe I can try and be brave too." In general, movie and TV casting has become more sensitive and diverse over the decades. It may not be perfect, but it used to be a lot worse. And Mayim Bialik can attest to that through her own personal experience. When she began her on-screen career in the mid-1980s, there was a push for actors to fit a mold that she just didn't match. As she explained to Edge magazine, "In 1986, when I started, there was a notion that people on television needed to look what they called all-American. I didn't look all-American. I've always had prominent features and I've always looked ethnic, so I ended up doing a lot of character roles." Despite that hurdle, Bialik managed to be cast in the lead role on the sitcom Blossom. But that doesn't mean that there weren't still negative experiences along the way. On an episode of her podcast in 2023, she explained that she was usually typecast as the weird friend, and even when she played the lead, that didn't protect her from people's nastiest impulses.
People made horrible comments about my appearance, which have never left me since I've, been 14 years old.
Bialik was also affected by a Saturday Night Live sketch parodying Blossom in 1994, in which Melanie Hutzel wore a prosthetic nose to play Blossom. Bialik commented on the sketch many years later, as she wondered how it must have felt for the Jewish girls who had told her they felt proud of their heritage after seeing her on TV. It's worth noting, though, that Hutzel never felt comfortable with the decision to wear the prosthetic, and the two actresses hold no grudges against each other. It's easy to imagine that landing a lead role on a popular TV show at a young age could have you set for life, but at least for Mayim Bialik, that wasn't exactly the case. After Blossom ended, she headed off to college and took a break from acting to pursue a doctorate in neuroscience. That choice was partly about being fed up with the public eye, as she explained to Publishers Weekly in 2017. "I'm not saying that actresses who stayed on that path are shallow or anything like that, but it was not fulfilling for me anymore at that stage of my life." Even though Bialik was sure about her decision, that didn't mean her transition into college was easy. Because of Blossom, she was already pretty famous, whether she wanted to be or not. Furthermore, there was also the simple matter of academic rigor that she had to deal with. As she recalled, "I was not a natural science student. It took some time and a lot of hard work for me to catch up."
The fact is, you're going to have to work hard, and it's sometimes not going to be easy.
On top of all that, Bialik hadn't made a completely life-changing amount of money on Blossom. Since she couldn't skate by on any extreme wealth, she had to budget her way through those years, just like pretty much any other non-famous college student. In 2003, Bialik married Michael Stone, and they went on to have 2 sons together. Alas, this wasn't a love story that would last forever, as they divorced in 2012, citing irreconcilable differences. Despite the split, they focused on making sure their boys would have the smoothest transition possible, and that they would do everything they could to continue giving them a loving childhood. Since then, Bialik and Stone have kept that promise, even if the exact circumstances haven't always been easy. In 2018, she wrote on her blog about attending Thanksgiving with Stone along with his new girlfriend and her family. This was something that made her understandably nervous and also made her question her own future regarding marriage. She ultimately went through with the dinner for the sake of her kids, and fortunately, it all went well. In general, Bialik is proud of how hard she and Stone have worked at their relationship since the end of their marriage, even if he still annoys her sometimes. So in a way, this chapter of Bialik's life was more of a bump in the road that avoided turning into a full-blown tragedy thanks to diligence and thoughtfulness. When Mayim Bialik was announced as one of the new hosts of Jeopardy in 2021, the decision was met with a fair amount of pushback, with many observers taking issue with her history of controversial opinions. Perhaps most notable are her stances on vaccines and parenting styles. She's been openly critical of vaccines since 2009, although her opinions appear to have changed somewhat in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. She revealed that she and her family would receive vaccines for COVID and the flu, though her position still proved to be controversial when she said,
Do I think we give way too many vaccines in this country compared to when I was a vaccinated child? Yes.
Bialik has also been a vocal proponent of attachment parenting, a practice that emphasizes close bonds between parents and their kids. However, some of these practices are considered high risk by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Furthermore, the term attachment parenting was coined by Dr. William Sears, who has been accused of having anti-feminist views. In addition to all that, Bialik has promoted health supplements whose efficacy is based on shoddy science, and she's released statements that have been interpreted as victim-blaming. These are in many ways controversies of Bialik's own making rather than full-blown tragedies, but either way, they're certainly a pain to deal with. If you or someone you know needs help with mental health, please contact the Crisis Text Line by texting HOME to 741-741. Call the National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline at 1-800-950-NAMI 6264, or visit the National Institute of Mental Health website.